in the sign-in link you will find in the chat box. The sign-in link will be live for 15 minutes. Also listen for the sign-out code to place in the sign-out link found in the chat box towards the end of the session. Again, the link will be live for 15 minutes. Be sure to include your name and the license types of your CEUs when you fill out the conference evaluation. You must complete the conference evaluation for your CEU to be processed. You will receive your CEU certificate as soon as possible after the conference at the email address you used to register. We do hope that everyone, regardless of CEUs, will complete the conference evaluation. The conference evaluation link will be posted in the chat box, in the break time slides, and in our website. Throughout the conference, please only use the Q&A box to post questions for the speaker related to their presentation. Use the chat box only for technical questions and to find CEU and sign out links. I follow the Q&A box, combine like questions, and share with the presenter's presentation. Personal information can be seen by all, so please be careful with what you're posting on there, on the chat box or in the Q&A boxes. So at this moment, I want to give you that code. Okay, I want to introduce the code. The sign-in code is going to be 42. Make a note of this. The sign-in code is 42. And at the end of the workshop, I will give you the sign-out code. At this moment, I want to introduce to you Mr. Ben Odell. Ben Odell has done great things, and we're so happy to have you, Ben. And he's from the Center of Faith and Opportunity Initiatives with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Welcome.
One second, everybody. Let me get this. I am posting the resource because I know a lot of people are going to have that question there in the chat. But I'm so excited to be with you. This is one of my favorite conferences throughout the year. It's one of the most amazing conversations that happens around faith and mental health. And I'm so excited to connect with you all and to share a little bit about a resource that we've created as a way to help faith communities know where to start when thinking about addressing mental illness. And so I'm excited to do that. Let me get over to my PowerPoint. Make sure everybody sees that. So today in this resource, we're going to talk about 7 principles, 7 key ideas that we've identified. And these were developed by the Center for Faith and Opportunity Initiatives that's within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. For short, that's a long title. We just call it the HHS Partnership Center. And the goal of the Partnership Center is to build partnerships with community and faith-based organizations to serve individuals, families, and communities in need. We connect around all the different priority areas that are identified within the Department of Health and Human Services. And one of those areas that the department asked us to focus on was mental illness. So we brought together a group of leaders. We called this meeting Small Acts of Great Love, building a framework for faith communities to respond to mental illness. We had all these leaders, which included some people who are presenting at the conference today, and learned about different ideas, perspectives, key things to consider when having faith communities address mental illness in the community. As a part of that conversation, we had community leaders, we had clergy and faith community leaders. We had mental health professionals, clinicians who could help us understand some of these key items. We had individuals with mental illness participate, clients who wanted to help us understand, help us think through some of these criteria, help inform the different ideas that we would encourage faith communities to consider. But we also included caregivers, individuals who are providing care and support for individuals with mental illness, and had them think through what it looks like to consider their needs and challenges as well. Let me tell you, this meeting was a learning experience for me. It was an opportunity to sit and understand and think through some of these different perspectives. And what we developed as a result was a starting place. What is the kind of key information, the most basic points that we want to encourage faith and community-based groups to understand so that they can better serve individuals with mental illness and their caregivers, but also at the same time not be overwhelmed, not be oh, there's so much we have to do here. There's so many different pieces we have to learn. There's just some key things, some key 7 principles to think through. So let's talk about that. That became what we call the Compassion in Action, a guide for faith community serving people with experiencing mental illness and their caregivers. We've compiled it all. You can see I have a copy of it right here. It's on the screen and in my hand. And it goes through 7 different principles. These 7 principles we label with a title, and then we're going to talk through each of them. I'm excited to respond to questions. I'll note I already put a link to this resource in the box in the chat feature, and so you can find it there. You can just grab it right now, pull it down, be looking at it on your computer. Well, actually, don't do that yet. Stay with us. Stay here. Stay on this page. Follow and talk with us. Share your questions. Let's make the use of most of this time together, and then you can go and grab that link afterward. But this resource is here. It goes through the 7 principles. Let me quickly overview them for you real quick. We start with the inherent dignity principle, which talks about the value of every person, including individuals with mental illness. We then talk about mental illness, the illness principle, and that faith communities need to affirm that mental illness is a form of illness. We talk about caregivers and the need to address the needs for caregivers. We talk about professional assistance, how faith communities need to affirm the role of professional mental health professionals in addressing mental illness. We talk about treatment and medication principles. So it's not just about affirming their role, but it's also about affirming the treatment, the recommendations that those individuals make to persons in need. We talk about complexities. Serving individuals with mental illness is not always easy, and we want faith communities to go into this with clear eyes and clear minds, clear hearts, with knowing about some of those challenges. But ultimately, and I love ending on the hope principle, that we can hold on to hope for individuals with mental illness and their caregivers and be encouraging. So let's go through each of these real quick. Oh, before I do that, every principle in this guide includes action items, concrete things that communities can do to put these principles into action. Many include practical exercises, concrete steps that you can take, little workshops, conversations, discussions that you can have. And many of the principles also include federal resources, both in general and specific to each principle that can be supportive to the work that you're doing in the community. So this is not just an idea, it also has action items. We want the guide to be a resource in word and deed for thinking through how to address some of these challenges. So now let's talk about these principles. Let me pull up this page in my notes real quick. I wanted to focus on a couple of key items in each of these principles, so I made notes for myself. Mental illness affects a lot of people. And I think sometimes faith communities don't even have a sense of how many people are experiencing mental illness. In fact, new CDC data released just about a week ago notes that twice as many people are experiencing mental health challenges as before COVID-19. So that's 2 in 5 as opposed to 1 in 5, which was kind of a widely acknowledged number. Twice as many people are experiencing mental health challenges during this time. So it's not just that we have a lot, we have even more in this moment. The inherent dignity principle says that all faith communities affirm the value of people, affirm that inherent dignity of each person, and that we have an opportunity to recognize individuals with mental illness as having that inherent dignity, who are people. And we can think through the language that we can use to talk about those people as we think about how to connect with them. We don't say that someone who has cancer is cancer. We don't say that someone who has diabetes is defined by their diabetic condition. It's a key part. It's something that's important to know about those individuals. But so in the same way, we don't need to say that people are their mental illness, that they are many times the one that comes up a lot is are bipolar. And so we need to think about how are some of they are defined by these words. We need to be careful about using words in our community and think about how people who experience these mental health conditions might hear those words and think about them. And so we have an opportunity to be careful about that. And I think one of the things we talk about in the guide and in this principle is just to kind of listen and learn. Let's talk about that real quick. I'm going to go here. Know the facts, learn some of the facts, learn how many people have mental illness. But I wanted to come to this principle real quick. Listen first. Ask people in the community what their experience of mental illness is. Maybe they have loved ones. Maybe they have they themselves have had mental illness. Think about how you can speak respectfully. Be careful, being careful about the words that we use to describe some of these things. And just one of the things we note too is if you can't find someone with mental illness, we list a wide range of video resources, videos that you can watch that can help. In the absence of finding someone, maybe even before you go and find someone, you just sit and watch some videos of people sharing their story, very similar to our Inner and Voices session that we had earlier this morning. Just listen, hear some perspective, gain some ideas about how to understand some of these situations. But let me come back to this. And I think this kind of comes back to thinking about individuals with mental illness and how to connect with them. In the guide, we provide this resource. It's also a resource that you can download or get on our social media pages that we share. And we want to do more resources like this. We think of faith communities, and sometimes we think about the large congregations and the big kind of faith community places. But most faith communities are small, maybe just 100 people. And for those faith leaders who are leading those congregations, when we think about that 1 in 5 number, 20 people in a congregation of just 100 may have a mental illness or have experienced a mental illness across their life course. 8 people have received any mental health services. So 8 out of those 20 maybe, there's, and the note that there's a large number. We've been talking about access this morning. It's important to make sure and promote that more people get access to services. And in fact, even serious mental illness, 4 of those 20 are likely experiencing a serious mental illness. And so this is not just something that is, we tell people, you don't need to go out and find individuals with mental illness. If your congregation is interested in serving people with mental illness, there are many times in the pews, in the seats of the congregations where ministers are serving, where faith leaders are connecting with individuals. And they just have to be willing to start a conversation. And the guide helps you create some of those opportunities for conversations. So let's go forward. I'm not going to focus as much as on action items. I want to kind of go over some of these key principles. But again, the guide notes many of those action items. I'm going to highlight a few, but I'm not going to spend as much time on those as we move forward so we can get through all 7. We acknowledge mental illness as an illness. So let's talk about that. Mental illness is a complex interaction of biological, psychological, and environmental factors. Now, let me say a quick word about that because I think it's a challenge. We know that there are some faith communities that wrestle with understanding mental illness, thinking about it in lots of different ways. We tried to identify a definition here that could engage as many faith communities and leaders as possible. And I think we were careful. We want to recognize that it is biological, that there are things that are going on inside the body related to mental illness that are key to understand. But it is also, at that same time, psychological. There are things that are happening within the brain. And then there are also environmental factors. I love Dr. Moorhead. It's, environmental factors, stress, psychological, biological genes that are being expressed. And there is a complex interaction of all of the above that are leading to mental illness. But we have to recognize that that is what mental illness is. We have an opportunity to do that in our faith communities. We encourage an action item for faith communities to consider is that they identify a definition, something that they could rely on to go back to actually define what they think of mental illness being. We encourage you to reach out to mental health professionals as you're making that definition. So it's something that is within lines of science and what they're trying to put forward. And so thinking about that. And so then also we in this principle acknowledge that mental illness requires diagnosis, that a faith leader can refer to someone. We're going to talk about that later, but making sure that that diagnosis happens with a mental health professional who has the expertise to do that. As a part of acknowledging what mental illness is, it's also important to recognize what it's not. It is not a lack of belief in a higher power. It's not the result of what a faith community might consider a sin. And it's certainly not the consequence of an action of the person per se. I think this is interesting and again, something we have to wrestle with in our faith traditions and beliefs, but it's important to say what mental illness is not as much as it is to say what it is. Um, with this, and I mentioned reaching out to faith and community leaders, it can be a really helpful thing to think about how you can engage training and learning in these spaces, how you can connect with different programs like mental health first aid, like companionship training that is provided through Pathways to Promise, free smaller suicide prevention trainings that you can take. There are many different training programs that are out there, and sometimes it can be not just formal training, but just going and talking to someone who serves in a mental health professional position, just to learn a little bit more. And we also talk about knowing the signs and symptoms of mental illness. And here, I wanted to show you this. This is a resource we created from what's called the American Psychiatric Association's, what we call the Faith Guide for Mental Illness. It is an excellent resource. I can't commend it to you leaders who are looking at this issue enough. It goes into in depth on key topics and areas of interest. But one of the things they list are signs and symptoms of mental illness. And what's important about this graphic and this guide and the resource therein is that it doesn't say what any of these signs and symptoms are related to a diagnosis. A faith leader can be aware of these things when someone's coming to them with a challenge. And if they see any of these things, what we say, I love this note, these observations may, and we capitalize, we bold, may help identify a person with mental illness. They are not, you can't say you have a mental illness if you see these things, but they're all suggestions of if you see these things in a person, maybe you could refer them to a mental health professional, encourage them, walk along with them as they consider that possibility so that they can consider that possibility. And I think what's important here is that when we see these and we help someone refer to someone with them, we're helping improve the care that they're receiving. And so in our faith communities, what we care about is making sure that people are taken care of, that they have their needs met. And if as a part of that, we're thinking about maybe some of these things that people may be experiencing as challenges could be possibly mental health issues, if we work with a mental health professional who can help make sure that's the case or not the case, then we can address many of the other spiritual and religious considerations alongside of that. Or just if there's not a condition there, we can, as a mental health professional decides, then we can, identify different spiritual strategies that can be taken in the community to support those needs and address those challenges. So, but the mental health professional and at least encouraging someone to consider that and knowing what these are a key step to consider as we think through how to support individuals with mental illness. But we also don't just want to think about the individual with mental illness. We also want to think about their loved ones, their caregivers who are providing support and care. So often, I think one of the things we see is that sometimes this population is not as well as visible to some faith communities, when in fact it could be, I think, one of the most it's the person in this relationship who can benefit some of them in many ways, in so many ways, by the faith community. One of the things we emphasized as we looked at this was that individuals with mental illness have the care relationship that's provided through a clinician. They have that caring relationship, but the caregiver does not have that same dedicated partner to caring for them as they provide care. And we think faith communities can be a key resource in this opportunity. But it's not always easy. Just recently, we had a presenter come on who I think is being involved in the Pathways to Hope conference as well, Tracy Blackfall from Ohio. And I loved one of the things she shared with us as a part of thinking through caregivers and the challenges they experience. She noted that at one point her faith community was interested in learning more of engaging on mental illness, but that the stigma and the fear related to revealing a diagnosis for a loved one kept her from sharing with her faith community that there was a mental health challenge in her family. And she notes that she believes her faith community, that her loved one did not benefit from care and support that faith community could have provided had she been willing to reveal. And I think one of the things we want to think about is just, not just that we also want to reach out to caregivers, but just how hard it might be for caregivers to overcome that fear and stigma, the concern that they might have about revealing a diagnosis for themselves or for a loved one. And just think how we can make our communities a place where it's okay to talk about mental illness, that we have let them know that this is a topic that we talk about here in our community. This is a topic that we share with people about. And how we can empower those unique caring relationships. So let me put this in practice real quick. And it sounds so simple, and yet I can tell you that we hear from caregivers and mental health individuals with mental health challenges so often, it doesn't happen. So I just want to encourage you to think about this simple act that faith communities can take that would make a huge difference. And this is an action item within the guide. It's a discussion, it's an exercise. Think about all the different ways your faith community provides care. Do they bring meals to someone in need, for new mothers or for someone with a medical diagnosis? Do they call people who call and check up on individuals who are ill? Do you have systems set up so that people who are hurting may be able to provide services? Ask how any of those existing services may be things of care that you can provide to individuals with mental illness and their caregivers. Many times we talk about mental illness as the no casserole disease. So does your congregation make casseroles? Do you make hot dish? Do you make any number of different types of meals that we bring? Our family makes baked ziti when we bring it around to people. How can we bring baked ziti to caregivers? How can we bring casseroles to individuals with mental illness? Because that's one thing our faith communities do. We bring food, we bring support, we bring care, we bring noticing that, hey, you're hurting, can I help you? And so we have an opportunity to leverage all those existing ways that we provide care in communities. I could spend a lot of time here, but let's keep going. The professional assistance principle, I noted earlier that a faith leader can make a referral, but they can't make a diagnosis. They can identify signs and symptoms, but they don't have the ability to connect signs and symptoms to a specific diagnosis without some level of training. So what is important is for faith leaders to recognize their space of training. Maybe they received a counseling degree as a part of their, and so they may have some more skill sets related to that. But broadly and across the board, what we want to affirm is that when we start thinking about mental illness, we want that to be connected to the expertise of the individual making the diagnosis. And many times that is a licensed mental health professional who makes that diagnosis. I want to note that I think this can be seen as really freeing to a faith leader who's providing assistance, that they can know some of these signs and symptoms, but they don't have to know what it means or what it looks like, but that they can just say, if that's there, maybe I can work with a mental health professional who can help identify some of these things, who can make the connection from the signs and symptoms to a formal diagnosis or identify a need. And in clarifying that role, it's no way means that the job of the faith leader is over. Just because a faith leader refers someone to a mental health professional doesn't mean that suddenly the faith community doesn't have anything to do. And that's what we talk about in the next principle. One of the things we noted when we put this guide together was that we really wanted to think through what it looks like to not just affirm the role of the mental health professional, but also affirm the guidance, the recommendations that the mental health professional provides to someone in need, and that they encourage the opportunity to walk alongside. The metaphor we have here at the beginning is around chronic health and chronic health conditions such as diabetes or high blood pressure. We note early treatment is a key strategy in all of these chronic conditions, and it's a key strategy in mental health. We know that when a diagnosis of mental illness is made as early as possible in the life course, the severity of symptoms are significantly reduced. So if we can help people identify just with chronic health conditions, we can think through different ways that we can make sure we can get treatment as early as possible and then invite that treatment into someone's life. And so that means identifying these situations, identifying some of those signs and symptoms, and connecting someone to provide care, but then also walking alongside that individual. So it's not just about sending them out and then never asking about diabetes, never asking them about their blood pressure again. It's about checking in. It's about how is it going with that treatment? I bet it's hard. It's about asking if someone is staying on their medications and feeling like those medications are providing the assistance that they need. Again, Dr. Moorhead's presentation was so excellent, but all the different medications that he talked about that can be available and that are proven to be effective in many different circumstances and situations. We've heard stories of faith leaders and clients for whom just that simple question, hey, are you staying on your meds, was a key part of their wellness journey, because the faith community came alongside someone and said, hey, this is something that's important. But let me say this too, it's not just medications, it's also therapy. Again, Dr. Moore had talked about cognitive behavioral therapies, talk therapies, and just checking in with someone who's experiencing some of these things can be important just to make sure they're staying with that process. But let me also say a real key kind of basic principle that might be here is their faith communities to ask, where are the facilities where individuals are hospitalized if necessary for mental health conditions? Just like faith leaders can visit someone in the hospital, they can know where the facility is at where someone might need to be hospitalized and visit and encourage connection there. We've talked to caregivers who have made visitations to hospitals, and many feel like where faith leaders go to visit someone in the hospital, rarely do they see that same thing happen for individuals who are in psychiatric wards. And again, it's just a step of knowing where those are at, checking with a family to see if it's okay to connect in that setting and space, and asking how we can provide support in that space as well. And like I said, even just knowing where those locations are might make a huge difference for families in need. But with all this, it is not always easy, to say the least. And I think one of the things that I would emphasize and start here, it's at the end, but I would put it at the beginning, is that faith communities can enter this work with a degree of humility, saying that we don't have all the answers, that we are sometimes learning ourselves. I'm learning myself. Faith leaders and faith communities are learning themselves. We have an opportunity to sit and to learn to understand different challenges that might be out there, different ways of understanding some of these situations, and just to be learners in this moment, to sit under that teaching. And then also to engage this with empathy and compassion, to co-feel. And I might say not only co-feel, but walk with. And then again, that was something we heard in the previous Inner and Voices presentation that I appreciated so much, that we have an opportunity to walk with individuals who are experiencing mental illness. We have gifts of being present, and maybe not just being present, but also being willing to stay when it's hard. And this is something that we want at faith communities when they're addressing and talking and sharing things about mental illness. We don't want them to, not go into this thinking that this is all going to be easy and services are going to just connect and people are going to all of a sudden be better. There are going to be times when people have relapsed. There are going to be times when people face challenges. And what we don't want to see are faith communities that then when those challenges hit, that becomes just one more broken relationship that contributes to the challenges, either for the caregiver or for loved ones with mental illness. We have an opportunity to stay with people who are going through challenges and to ask how we can prepare ourselves in that space. Let me also say that one of the things we talk about in the guide in this space is that suicide is a reality for individuals experiencing challenges. And so we need to be prepared to how to address someone who may be a risk to themselves or to others. That's knowing suicide hotlines. That's knowing how to respond to someone who may be a risk. Some communities have less resources than others, and so it's knowing about what some of those might be. And so thinking through how we connect to some of those supports in emergency situations is a key step, a necessary step for acknowledging the complexity. But again, that's a complex issue. Not every person who has a mental illness is experiencing suicidal ideation or suicidal risks. And so we also don't want to say at the same time, again, it's complex. Just because you have a mental illness, we need to make sure, because we're talking about mental illness and we're talking to this person, we need to assume or make assumptions about that person related to suicidality. But It's important to know about and to be aware of and to be prepared for, both in your congregation and in the leadership's experience, to make sure we're ready to address some of those challenges. And here, 7 principles. When I was doing this workshop and I was like, am I going to be able to get through 7 principles? We've got lots of time. I'm excited. We're going to have lots of times for questions. So I want you to be thinking about those questions, thinking about the different ideas. And I'm going to come back to that screen and catch some of those questions here in a second. And Olga, if I can ask you, I can't see it on the screen right now. So if you can get me ready with the first question, you think we should talk about, that would be really helpful, because I can't see it on my screen right now. So I appreciate you helping me with that. Hope. What are our faith communities and our houses of faith if we are not houses of hope? If we are not residences of resilience? We have opportunities to be that. One of the things I've talked to some professionals about who've looked at this is they have come back around often that the defining principle of the work in faith and mental health is that faith communities hold onto hope. They have that hope and in something greater, and so that they can invite individuals with mental illness to participate in that hope. I love right next to us, another workshop. I'm going to try and tell this to you without you wanting to go over and hear Brad. So stay with me. I'm going to tell you something Brad says that I love that Brad says. Brad Hefts with Fresh Hope for Mental Health. He says, hope is best caught rather than taught. And that our faith communities can be a place where hope catches, where it's contagious, because of the way in which we talk about the challenges that we're experiencing, including the challenge of mental illness. So we have an opportunity. We have that opportunity to be places where hope is caught. We have an opportunity where we can be places of hope for individuals with mental illness. But key part of this work is supporting peer support. People with lived experience, many times it's a term for peers, are individuals with lived experience of mental illness. And no better person to teach, not to teach, but who can show what hope looks like than someone who is in a stable place, who is maintaining their stability, and are in a healthy place to be able to share their hope with others. Faith communities have an opportunity to put those people forward, to share their story. It's to me a great way, again, to honor and respect all the way back to that inherent dignity principle, is having someone share their story of their mental health journey in their community, in their faith community, on a event. One of the other groups that's a great example, I got this from My Quiet Cave, which is an excellent organization. They say that stories kind of break stigma, that stories are the best way to understand some of this, because it appreciates some of that complexity that we just talked about. And so they encourage congregations and faith communities that they work with to, when they talk about mental illness, to do it in the form of story. And I think also often with our stories, with the best stories, they have a hope that is the thread throughout that story that captures and connects to people. And that's why we enjoy some of the stories that we enjoy so much, that we can see that hope in that story. So we have opportunities to put those individuals forward to share their story, so that people in the faith community are like, I can be like that. I can catch on to that hope. But also, I think it's important that hope that's within faith communities doesn't just stay within those 4 walls, doesn't just stay within the facility behind whatever type of supports that are provided there, that hope moves into the community, that hope moves with people who have it, who can walk alongside individuals, and that hope can walk around the world, that they can love with hope once they have hope, that they can live with hope. And just like we're talking about with peers, that then they can give that hope away to others. And that's what we think is such a huge opportunity in our faith communities, to be spaces that facilitate that hope. So again, the guide provides resources. Appendix 1 was a resource that we created from a workshop that we did with a lot of the faith leaders that talked about what to say and what not to say. A quick word about that. I think one of these talks about that we don't want to use toxic positivity. That's the second bullet on what not to say. This is something we hear a lot, that faith communities can sometimes be this place that's just like, well, it'll just get better and everything will be good. That kind of reduces the hurt and challenge that someone's faced. And so what we want to do is not be careful about that. We also talk about person first language, which is some great resources on person first language. I think that's one of the things we got from NAMI National. Just really making sure that people, what's what we talked about, that they're not defined by their illness. They're a person first, and then that has a mental health condition or experiences the symptoms of mental illness. So, and let me say quickly, I love that last bullet tool. Don't try and solve or fix the diagnosed illness. That's the job of mental health professionals, and faith communities can just walk alongside individuals as they go through treatment. We also include a referral template. Again, this is key for thinking about different mental health professionals. I'll note in here, one thing we do in the guide is list all the different types of mental health professionals that are present in communities, all of the different ways, and then help individuals know what those different types of professionals are, so that they can think about making a referral, not just to any mental health professional, but to the right mental health professional with the right level of expertise. If we can, as faith communities, make the best referral possible, that's going to set the individual that may be diagnosed with mental illness up for success by connecting them to the level of care that's appropriate for the need. And so, let me say this too, in the absence of knowing that, send someone who's experiencing symptoms to someone, and let the mental health professional figure that out. But if you're able to know some of these things and consider some of these strategies, you can help facilitate that process and just make that process smoother. This is what we talk about in the mental health and the healthcare field, as a warm handoff. The warmth of that handoff, the warmth and the knowledge and the expertise that it can reflect, can make that handoff that much more successful. And again, we're setting individuals up for as much success as possible from our faith communities to the mental health and medical field. The guide also includes a wide range of mental health resources, of faith resources, of federal resources, peer support groups, faith-based peer support groups, caregivers, trainings, videos. There's a lot there. We're hopeful and excited to soon have this all up on our website, where we can add even more resources and strategies, programs that we've identified since this resource has come out. And so we hope you'll be able to connect with us through the website and see even more resources that'll come from out of this print into a website that will be even more accessible, direct click-throughs to some of these resources. And the print guide will just include a link to that page, and then you'll be able to click through to that page and go to all these different resources. And so we're excited about that opportunity and what it will look like in the near future. So there is the page where you can go. This is all the information that you can use to connect with us: email, website, our YouTube page. I mentioned with our YouTube page that's there, youtube.com/HHS Partnership Center. All the webinars that we do are posted there that are recorded. And so the caregiver webinar that I was talking about earlier, that's right up there. The overview of the guide is up there if you want to share that in another place. And I apologize for my phone ringing if you can hear that. And then a whole series of 101 webinars that we did last year describing co-occurring disorder, eating disorders, a number of different ways in which you can look and learn more about mental illness and their situation and their challenges. Relevant to coming up, there's a webinar from last year that was one of my favorites that included partners from NAMI that talked about what it's like to go through the holidays and just some of the challenges of going through the holidays for individuals with mental illness. And so that's an excellent webinar. Phone numbers there. I don't think it's Facebook, but Facebook is also HHS Partnership Center, if I remember correctly, as well as Twitter. And so there are all places where you can connect with us to learn more about this work and to stay in touch with us as we continue. We're in a webinar series right now that's talking about each of these principles. Next Tuesday, we're going to have a webinar where we're talking about mental health and faith leaders working together. And I'm really excited for that webinar. Some great content that we're going to cover. And we're preparing we're preparing a webinar series for the fall that's going to really focus on some key principles of spirituality and mental health, and what does it look like to look at the intersection of both those issues. So We continue to provide resources. The website's going to get updated. You can ask for copies of the guide at partnerships if that's something you'd like to share with your community. And let me end with this. I think one of the things that we can do is just start conversations. So maybe that you get a copy of the guide or you get a PDF and you just share that with a faith leader, share that with a mental health professional, and say, what does this look like? What did it look like for us to build relationships and connections to address spirituality and faith in our communities for those individuals with mental illness and their caregivers? What would it look like for us to start these conversations and be in dialogue and facilitate some of this important work that can address, go back to Dr. Moorhead's presentation. We know that spirituality, that religious participation makes a difference. The research shows that. So if it does show that, how can we work with mental health professionals? How can we work with faith leaders to bring that in and to make outcomes for individuals with mental illness that much better because they're incorporating and including some of these services? So I'm so excited to be with you. I'm so excited that we have extra time. So let me switch back over here. And Olga, let me see if you have anything to share or if there are any questions.
We definitely have a lot of questions. I'm not sure if you're able to see the Q&A questions at the bottom.
I've got them up, and I see the first one that has 4 votes. Should we start with that one?
Absolutely. Go with that one.
Let's see. What should we do if our faith communities are resistant to these concepts? What should we do to address these hardened hearts? Emma, that's a great question. And this is something we see a lot. We developed the Compassion in Action Guide. Let me say this. We developed this guide just for that exact audience, for those people, to say, where do we start? And again, we were very sensitive to definitions, to terms that we knew would create challenges for people. So we hope this guide and the content therein is either a guide for individuals like yourself who want to have your faith community start this conversation, but also it can be just, hey, I saw this at a conference. I was wondering what you think about that. But then let me also say that I think the thing that softens, hardens, hurts the most is personal experience. So if a faith community can hear what experience happened, that yes, spiritual practices made a big difference in my health and wellness, but even more so, the medicine that I take, the therapy that I went through, these made a big difference in my life too. And so, and maybe even, this is dependent on each story, I know it's true in my story, that understanding and working through the therapy and the counseling that I've done has made a big difference for my faith, has made a big difference for my expressions of spirituality. And so, faith leaders hearing that, understanding a little bit more. Let me then also say that just sitting down with a mental health professional, a faith leader sitting down with a mental health professional can make a huge difference. Just hearing and learning from one another and the ways in which they both care for individuals with challenges can make a huge difference for what we can think through. Let me say, I'm going to go through these questions as much as I can in order of the number of votes. So let me see. I see one here with 4. So make sure you vote for the questions that are strong and great. And I think they're moving around on me, you guys. So this is excellent, but I'm going to get back to the top. Here's the next one with 4 votes. What are some of the most common harmful beliefs or harmful ways of dealing with mental disorders that are still prevalent in faith communities? Well, sorry, we only have about 20 minutes left, and I don't know if I can answer that question in that amount of time. Well, let's go through this. I mean, I love, and I'm maybe reference what not to say and what to say. That's a great space that goes through some of those questions and what we heard from faith communities that they expressed or individual illness. It's the idea, this is easy. This is one that comes up often, that you can pray it away, or that some spiritual practice will magically make mental health conditions go away. That's something that a lot of people tell us that they've experienced in faith communities, and can really dismiss the reality of mental illness. And that's why the indolence principle is there, that a faith community needs to affirm the reality of mental illness in a community or for an individual experiencing challenges. And so that's really important. But that resource at the end is great. And I just think, again, maybe not approaching some of these things with humility, with compassion and empathy, kind of telling people about mental illness rather than listening to their experiences can be going to be a real challenge too. But then let me say this too. Lastly, on this question, one of the things I've seen and I've thought through a lot is when a faith community doesn't say anything about mental illness, when they are silent on the issue, that can be just as isolating, maybe more isolating for a faith community. Because then nobody knows that they can talk about it, even though, like we said, 20 people out of a group of 100 are experiencing this. They don't know it's something that they can bring up in the community. And so let me say the solution, a strategy. One of the things we talk about, another issue the center works on is substance use, opioid addiction specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And we have found that when we encourage faith communities just to offer whatever form of tradition your faith community is, in the Christian tradition, you pray for these individuals, offer recognition of these individuals who are experiencing this challenge, whatever that looks like in your faith tradition. And you just say, today we are recognizing people with mental health challenges, and we're praying for them and their caregivers. I can't tell you the number of times that's happened, or someone's prayed about struggling with addiction or opioids, and we hear that people come out of the woodwork to say, that was me you prayed for, and I appreciated that prayer. I appreciated that recognition. I appreciated that observance of our challenge. And that just, they're talking about me. And that's a great thing. Real quick, Cindy has an additional comment on that. Have you considered doing a similar guide for behavioral health providers around faith and spirituality? It's something we've been in touch with. One of the things we're working on, I emphasize this often, we don't just build the capacity of faith leaders to partner with mental health professionals. We're building the capacity of mental health professionals to work with faith leaders. And it's both and, not either or. So we've been really excited to be in dialogue with the mental health professional associations to have conversations and dialogues about what it looks like for them to affirm religion and spirituality in the work of treating clients. And so that is important as well. Not just building capacity of faith leaders, but also the capacity of mental health professionals to work with them. Next question from Jenny. Do you have a suggestion on how to begin reaching out to faith communities to begin conversations? So Jenny, let me encourage you to join our webinar next Tuesday on treating the whole person, because I'm going to give you something that they're going to tell you. I'm going to give you advance notice. Ready? You're getting inside baseball of a national webinar coming up on Tuesday at noon. We have a leader there, Dave Eckert, who's presenting, who does work in the community. And one of the things that they shared, and they're going to share next week, a faith leader, a pastor, is going to come on that Dave works with as a mental health professional. And I was asking them kind of how you identify people to work with, partners to engage with, faith communities to connect with. One of the things Doug said as the faith leader, the pastor that's presenting, is that he looks for the peacemakers. He looks for the people who are helping people, and then reaches out and connects with them and says, hey, you're helping people. I want to help people too. What was great as far as the faith leader saying that was then our other presenter, Dave, said, I do that too. When I'm looking for how I can connect with faith communities to talk about mental health issues, I look for the faith communities that are helping people in the community. I look for the peacemakers. To think about who I can identify that can help people in need. So Jenny, look for the peacemakers, look for the people who are helping people in need, and then ask how we can reach out and connect around these issues, begin conversations and dialogues about what it looks like to address some of these challenges. Lynn, let's see, there it is, Lynn. Nope. Eric just got beat out by Lynn, but Lynn, we're gonna get to your question in a second. I'm gonna go ahead and take this one, it's at the top. How does one go about developing a list of professionals to whom we can refer people? Finding reliable, trustworthy mental health professionals has proven especially challenging for me as a pastor. Eric, let me honor and respect that question. It is a challenge. We also know we talked about access to services. There are whole communities without mental health professionals in them, and I want to recognize and acknowledge that. Um, Hospitalizations that can be pretty far distance from locations where people are living, because we all again don't have as many of those resources as well. Um, so let me go through a couple different ways. In the guide, we talk about professional networks that can look at this and can identify mental health professionals in your community, whether or not that's American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association, all the different American Counseling Association, all those different associations that are listed have resources that identify where the professionals that work in those associations are, and you can reach out and find them. Many times and increasingly, many of those organizations are listing adding religious affiliation as something that they identify mental health professionals as. And so then you can try to identify individuals from the religious tradition you affirm, to connect with through that way. Let me also note findtreatment.samhsa.gov. That's findtreatment@samhsa.gov. Also lists mental health professional networks and mental health professionals in your community, and you can reach out and connect with them. And then let me just say, as a part of this trust, huge and really important. But let me suggest that you just ask to go out to coffee with some of those mental health professionals, offer to buy them breakfast, brunch, heck, if you do, again, it's just coffee. And well, let me say, during this moment, that's a little challenging, right? We can't just up and go get coffee. So maybe invite them to a Zoom call, maybe invite them to a FaceTime chat, and just ask, what are they doing in their community? What are they seeing? Maybe even in this moment, I mentioned we have twice as many people exhibiting mental health symptoms. Is that mental health professional overwhelmed? Are they experiencing some of the challenges of this moment? And as a faith leader in a community, just say, how can I connect with that? Is there something that I can support you in? Is there needs that your community has? And so thinking through that, here's Doug, our fearless leader. You can also check with local NAMI affiliates. The network of people seeking care and getting care is a great resource. Local FaithNet chapters can be a great place to connect with other faith leaders. Reach out to other faith leaders as well. Do they have a mental health professional? Let me say this too. Sometimes in faith communities, we have the conflict of interest in referring to someone who is a part of our faith community who's a mental health professional. But what if you reach out to another faith leader in your community and say, do you have a mental health professional in your community that I can work with? And then vice versa. Do you have anyone in your community that I can work with? And just making those referrals and networks can be really key and helpful. I love, and also notes there's a resource, sacrd.org in San Antonio, if you are local to San Antonio. So think about that. So let me get to Lynn's question. We're getting close on time here, right, Olga?
We're doing okay. We're doing fine.
Hey, so I was so excited about all these questions. So thanks for sending them in. So we're going to get to as many as we can. Lynn asked this question: if only 8 out of the 100 are getting mental health services, how do we know that 20% have mental illness? How is this figure at 20% arrived? That's a great question, Lynn. We pulled these numbers from a variety of different sources, but they are all peer-reviewed and/or government resources, and I believe the citations are included in the guide. The percent of individuals with mental illness is based on nationally representative surveys that tell us the number of mental illness. The number of treatment that is received is also based on surveys that show us the number of people who treated, but the data are two different sources. So you don't need to think about that's all just one survey. And that's why we can do 8 versus 10 or 8% out of 100. They're different places. And we're connecting those to try and help paint a picture as much as we can for faith and community leaders to, again, look at a population of 100 and just have a sense of how prevalent mental illness is. And so that's the way. And let me say, too, the number that I just used earlier, the 2 and 5, that's based on a whole nother survey of 5,000 respondents that were gathered at the end of June of this year, if I remember correctly, from the CDC. So we're pulling together data across multiple different sources and just trying to help paint a picture, help faith and community leaders understand some of these challenges and situations. Hope that helps. Again, look to the guide for the specific citations and the numbers. Another great number resource, any of the graphics from NAMI are phenomenal as far as really helping people understand some of these situations. So look to the resource. Let me see. You can print the PDF, but you can also send us an email at partnerships@hhs.gov, which is the link provided earlier. And we'll be glad to send you a few copies in the mail if you let us know. We just had those come in this week, if I remember correctly, at the office. So we're really excited to have physical copies that we can share with people. Can someone address the overlap of DD? Olga, are you sure you know what DD is?
I do not know what that is. I'm sorry.
Okay, so if Michelle can come in here and give us a comment, she'll make sure we know. Let me see if I can just figure it out from the rest of the question. Let me just read it real quick.
If we have any of our professional...
Maybe disability? The overlap with disability?
It's dual diagnosis.
Dual diagnosis. Thank you. That's it. Dual diagnosis.
Thank you, Gwenda.
Oh, excellent. I'm not seeing that side over there. I'm focused on this.
Mm-hmm.
Or developmental disabilities. DD, developmental disability, dual diagnosis. We have lots of different DDs I think we could use. This is a tricky one. Let me think about it for a second. We certainly acknowledge and recognize that there are ways in which these two overlap. There are ways in which substance use and mental illness overlap. I believe the statistic is that 50% of individuals experiencing substance use also experience mental illness. So it's a very high prevalence of what's called co-occurring disorder. And so let's start with this. In the guide, we talk about how individuals with mental illness are not just one thing. They are many things. They are people of faith. They are people with mental illness. They are people with family members and loved ones. They are people who maybe because of their illness have been estranged from family members and loved ones. No one is one thing. And so we need to recognize and honor that every different person has different situations and circumstances. And how can our faith communities connect and relate to some of those challenges and concerns? And then think through the ways in which we can support and encourage those individuals. Now, I think we note this is how a faith community can connect and work with them, right? And the faith community can address someone as a complex person. Sometimes our systems are not set up that way. Sometimes our treatment systems are not set up that way. Sometimes our clinical settings are not set up that way. And so many times we are working with those systems to think about understanding someone as a complex person. Many have many different experiences and backgrounds. And so we want to look at all of those things together and encourage as integrated an approach as possible. One of the things we're seeing right now is a lot of integration in medical and behavioral health. If I remember correctly, there's community health centers, CHCs, federally qualified health centers. If I remember correctly, as many as maybe 60 or 70%, it might even be more than that, are integrating behavioral health and physical health in their settings. And so this can be a great, community health centers can be a great resource in your community. Again, going back to the previous conversation, many times they have mental health services that others don't. And so that can be a great resource as well. You can get a copy. Oh, that's great. Look at people providing that link. And Tracy, let us know if you'd like that. So let's look through this.
Ben, if you have different organizations that are wanting to get the copy, how many copies are they able to get from you?
Let us know, and we will, just let us know what you're looking for, and we'll work with you to figure out how many we have and make them available as many possible. We have a limited number of each resource per a presentation, so or per group. So we just try and limit it and give as many as we are able to, but we don't have, we can't send a lot to everyone if we want to make sure as many people as possible have this resource. So But right now we're doing everything's on our computer. So you just send somebody the link, send them the
Right.
PDF, right? And they can bring it up on their computer. They can go through it and think through it and consider how it can look. What is this paper thing we talk of? This pencil thing? We're all talking through our computers these days, right?
That's
Um,
right.
so, how can I get our group publicized so that we can reach more people? So, thanks for this question, Tracy. I think it's a good question. Thanks for sharing your own story and your background. I appreciate that as well. Really appreciate everybody being willing to share their diagnosis. It's one of the ways we're going to change the conversation. Um, uh, I think going to faith communities and saying, "This is my story. I'd love to share it with others." Are there opportunities and places that there might be an opportunity to share with our community or other communities what my story is? And again, that story connects. Many people will be excited to learn more about that story, to hear your story. And there are many different settings and circumstances in our faith communities that provide opportunities for sharing stories. And if we frame it as, hey, we just want to share a story and say that we're doing this and we want to get more people involved, I think a lot of people will be excited to participate. Stories move people, they move conversations, they change things. And so sharing that story can make a big difference. Yep, the guide is there. I believe I will make sure I made a few edits to the PowerPoint that we shared. So I'll make sure the most updated PowerPoints are available that we can send. So thanks for this question, Murthy. I appreciate it. Can HHS seek and provide a list of organizations that are willing to better understand how to implement this from their own experience? So what in the guide, we list organizations, faith-based organizations, secular professional organizations, any number of different organizations that we would suggest as great groups to work with, to connect with, to talk about the strategies to find mental health professionals to work with. And that's why they're there, is to connect people to those different networks and organizations, both faith-based and secular, mental health professionals and faith communities that are doing this work. And so that's such a great group and work. On the question on disability, this makes you also think of a group that we've worked with that does some work around both disability and mental health. They're called Key Ministry. They're led by Dr. Steve Gersovich. Catherine Boyle is the lead of that group. And so Trish is like giving everybody all the best links. Man, this is awesome. That webinar sounds pretty awesome next Tuesday. People should join. Key Ministry does webinars, they do workshops, they do conversations around some of these topics too, and are very cognizant of the relationship between and the boundaries between disability work and disability ministries and mental health ministries. And so that would be a great organization to look at as it relates to some of those topics. Highly respect the work that they're doing, the great efforts that are have underway. So all the questions I'm seeing, Olga, as far as what has come in. Are there any, did you see any from the chat that were to bring over to think about?
I did not see anything right now, but they're very thankful for the presentation that you've had. I just want to just say a couple of things. Can I share something?
Yes, please.
Because I do work with the faith community, and my husband's a pastor. So we've been in ministry 32 years. So my goal is also to help out the faith community with mental health, with the physical, and of course the spiritual. But building those relationships is really important. Mental health culturally sometimes can be the wall, especially being Hispanic, Latina, in our faith communities that are Hispanic, Latinos. That's something you don't want to talk about. So even within the church walls, there is stigma about talking about mental health, which is a big one. Mm-hmm. So culturally, that's one of the ones that I have seen, even talking to other Hispanic pastors or Latino pastors, is seeing that there's sometimes that wall because they've been taught we don't talk about this stuff. So that's one of the things that I've seen that's pretty much really pretty big. When you're having to talk about mental health with pastors, with churches, the leaders in the church. So that was one of the things that I had observed, working with the faith community.
And Olga, that's a great point. And let me say a quick word about that related to this. You know, our African American brothers and sisters, uh, Asian Americans, Pacific Islander, any diaspora community that's present in the U.S. and also overseas. Um, Many of these traditions and communities deeply rely on faith communities. They are social networks, they are friends, they are partners, they are leaders. And so, as we think about really addressing the needs of all these populations um, that can connect around these different topics and works,
Right.
our faith leaders can be someone who can be a key resource in addressing the challenges of mental illness in some of our minority, ethnic, and socio-economic groups. All those different breakdowns, when you look at it, there's such a key group that we can connect with. But let me also say, I think, as Olga mentioned, it's where some of the deepest stigmas lie, where some of the deepest concerns and fears of bringing some of these up. And so there's work to be done. There's
That's
great
right.
work being done by, we just participated in the Faith and Mental Health Initiative of Atlanta that's doing work in the African American community there in Atlanta, both across the country. There's a great piece that was just up on NAMI's headquarters website about how the African American church can do more in this space and really address some of these. I commend that piece to you. It's an excellent piece. And then any number of different other resources that are increasing the conversation in our different communities. And so, there are lots of different ways we can talk and work through this. Let me mention there's a question over here from Michelle about Spanish speakers. And many are noting Fresh Hope does have a Spanish ministry that has begun this year, which has been really exciting. I'm very excited for the work that they're doing in that space. One of the great resources in Spanish language for mental health first aid, there are a lot of you can identify classes that are just by Spanish speakers
Mm-hmm.
and or in Spanish, and the mental health first aid guide is available in Spanish. And so that can be a great resource as well to identify a mental health first aid trainer who can do the training in Spanish. And any number of different other programs that can identify some of those Spanish speaking opportunities. We're having more resources developed in this space. I know a couple different groups that are doing some great work related to that. We've been working with Urban Strategies in some of that work and connecting. And one of the things we would love to do is to put this guide into Spanish as well. That's something we've tried to think through and consider. And any number of different other resources that are coming available in Spanish language. So these are all things that we're working on and groups are working on and trying to engage some of that population and community that may have a challenge related to language. But yeah, we're looking for all the different ways we can support our different communities and really think through how we can connect to these different programs. So,
That's right.
oh, and I see here Doug's talking about Vicky Coffee is doing a talk on mental illness and minority communities. I love it. She does such excellent work. And so that's a great opportunity as well. Another talk on mental health in the Hispanic community as well on Saturday. So
Right.
we have
And
lots of different workshops we can participate in on that conversation. Let me grab the Faith Mental Health Initiative.
we have another workshop too at on Saturday with La Familia Mental Health and the Hispanic community with Dr. Soricelis Davila. So if anyone's interested in something like that too, um, you know, wanting to know more information on how to work with the Hispanic community and mental health.
All these are great partners and groups that we can work with. And I think there's such an opportunity right now, specifically in thinking about faith and mental health, about how we can engage those different populations and communities to really have some meaningful and important conversations around faith and mental health for some of our minority communities and minority ethnic communities as well. So great opportunities there.
Absolutely. Let me see.
Look at
See
this.
you.
We got extra time, guys. We went through that so quick.
Hey,
Awesome.
you did great. You did really
Thanks.
wonderfully.
It was a pleasure to be with you all today.
Yes. Any other questions anyone else has? I know that we have a couple more minutes and we can take maybe another question, one more. No one else? I don't see any on the left.
Let me I'll put in a plug here. It looks like Monica's asking for a link to the resource you just shared, if you have that. Because you're here, you missed out on an amazing presentation from Brad Heffs. He's such a great organization and mental health, or Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Let me encourage you to go back and check out that recording after you're here. Brad and Fresh Hope for Mental Health are doing such excellent work. Hope coaching. We talked about being hope, providing hope. That's a concrete program that they're running. The work that they're doing to really empower and strengthen individuals with mental illness to be peers and support in their communities. It's just excellent. There are a number of organizations that are working in this space, whether or not it's Grace Alliance or another great organization, Reboot Recovery, is doing work not just with veterans, but all populations. Again, all links that can be found in the Compassion Action Guide. And so I encourage you to check that out, look at it, and participate on these upcoming webinars to hear more about some of these programs and efforts. So it has been a pleasure to be with you all here from DC and to be connecting all the way down in San Antonio. And I know we have probably people from all over the place. So I want to thank Pathways to Hope for this conference. And I'm excited to kind of go with you all to the next session that we end up going on, and so that we can sit and listen as well and learn from all the different and the rich programs that are provided. So I want to thank NAMI NAMI San Antonio for hosting this amazing conference, for Olga's facilitation, and for all the different work that's going on. So
thank you again, Ben. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to hear you.
Thank you.
All right, before anyone leaves, I'm going to give you the sign out code for this session. The sign out code for your CEUs is going to be 62. Sign out code is 62. So we're really happy. Thank you so much for participating, and we will see y'all at the next workshop.